Okay, so good afternoon. My name is Dennis Olivares, and I'm having a pre-conference meeting with my fellow social studies teacher, Dalia Mendez. We're going to go over a series of questions pertaining to her lesson that she's giving tomorrow. So I want to thank her on doing this on such short notice and taking a look at these pre-conference questions. The first one under standards and alignment 1.1. The first question is, how is technology usually integrated into your lessons to support mastery of the lesson's goals?
Okay. So for the unit that we're discussing right now, right, we're in the civil rights movement. So using technology in the classroom is vital when I have students research, right? So we use Chromebooks, right? When we're doing short projects, I like to use Canva, especially SAQs, which are short answer response questions, right? For SAQs, I allow them to use Canva Imagine, right? Because I do have a couple of students who struggle writing on paper, right? Or they're just suffering through writer's block. So Canva Imagine is a good resource to kind of help them and assist them, right? In writing these short answer response questions. And I think it's very vital that they learn how to write these SAQs for their STAR test that requires them to answer short answer responses.
Okay, excellent. So you're going to use Chromebook research. You're going to be covering the civil rights movement. And with your Chromebook research, you're going to be utilizing Canva Imagine, which is going to support your short answer responses. You are going to have students working on SAQs, which are short answer response questions. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. And specifically, what was the topic on the civil rights again?
For the civil rights movement, we're going to focus on the historical development, Supreme Court cases, right? So we're going to look at Sweat versus Painter, Plessy versus Ferguson, and Brown versus Board of Education.
Ferguson. And I'm sorry, what was the first case again?
Sweat versus Painter.
Okay, we'll put those three down. Thank you very much. And we'll go ahead and move on to the next one. It covers under data and assessment 1.2. What formal and informal techniques do you use to collect evidence of students' knowledge and skills?
So for formal and informal techniques, I like using classroom discussions, especially putting them in scenarios, right? I like to ensure that I invoke some emotion in them if they were living in that era in the 1960s,
Okay.
especially since the demographic that we have are majority minorities. So I like to include and show them, expose them to the Jim Crow laws that kind of existed then. And so I create these scenarios and these classroom discussions that allow students to speak their concerns or opinions, right? And so I like to use classroom discussions. I like to use the warm ups, the exit tickets, right? And then, of course, having them journal.
Okay, so they have classroom journals, classroom discussions, and exit tickets.
Yes.
Now, are the classroom journals, is that part of the warm-up then?
The classroom journals, I use them for warm ups, and then I also use them for scenarios.
Warm-ups and scenarios. Okay.
For short, right? Yeah.
Oh, short. Okay, like a quick write activity.
Yes.
Okay. Quick write activity. All right. So put that here. All right, excellent. Now for informal, what strategies should I expect to see in your classroom?
Um, so informal, you expect to see for, so like I like to integrate some TED Ed videos, So sometimes students will look at that and then they'll answer some of the questions. This kind of leads into and ties into the classroom discussion, but it kind of allows me to kind of fill in those gaps and see where they're not understanding, and it allows me to adjust.
Okay.
And then at the same time, when I include primary source analysis, students have a chart, right, and a graphic organizer that I like to check. And so, with that in mind, as they're working either with a partner or in a group, but particularly during this lesson, they're going to be doing group work, right? So, they're going to analyze it together and they're going to have a chart while doing that research, right? And it'll allow me to monitor, check in with these groups, and adjust as needed.
Okay, monitor and adjust. Okay, so I can expect to see TED videos with assessment questions, graphic organizers, group work analysis, and lastly, monitor and adjusting.
Mhm.
Okay, excellent. Let's see here. The next question will be under standard 1.3, knowledge of students. So how do your lessons demonstrate your familiarity with students' prior knowledge, life experiences, and interests?
So with prior knowledge, I like to usually include these in warm-ups. I tend to ask them, okay, what kind of questions would you have for civil rights movement? Are you familiar with civil rights movement? It kind of gives me the idea of what I need to touch base on. Their life experiences, I tend to include their interests, right? And so this is where like these scenarios kind of play in, especially since our demographic are minorities, so Latinos, African Americans, right? And so to them, this kind of ties into them, and it kind of gives them that kind of like surprise moment of wow, this actually happened, right? And so with that in mind, I allow them to make connections, right, to real world events, right? And if they bring it up in class, I allow it to discuss with them, right, about what's happening, what kind of civic responsibilities would be included, right, for these students, because I think it's very important for students to get them ready for after high school, right?
Okay.
Um, and then for their interest, right? So I tend to tie in their interests. And what I like to do, since our students are very transient, they come in, they stay for a short time, they leave, right? I'll give them a survey, and on that survey, it tells me their interests, and I try to integrate it as much as I can into the lesson. So the civil rights movement kind of gives me that flexibility with with the specific kiddos that I have right now, right? To so that I can include their interests into the lesson.
Okay. Okay, so for prior knowledge, you're going to utilize warm-ups, right? Connect with prior learning. Life experiences, you make connections to real-world events or personal experiences in their own communities. And lastly, with interests, you're going to utilize like student surveys that are as part of the lesson, and you're going to utilize that to obtain feedback.
Yes.
Okay, now is the student survey, is that going to be like an exit ticket activity, I assume?
That's more like for the new student who comes in, right? So I
Oh,
tend
okay.
to have these surveys, right? For these students, it kind of gives me an idea, okay, what works best with them. They kind of give me a little bit about themselves. And then
Uh,
in there, it has a question of their interests.
okay, welcoming. Okay, so you use those to welcome new students.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Um, Next, we're going to go into 1.4 activities. How do you plan for questions and opportunities for students to engage in higher order thinking and problem solving?
So these help a lot with classroom discussions, right?
Okay.
Post a question on the board, right? And a scenario. So, for example, for civil rights movement, when we discuss Emmett Till, I'll explain the scenario. And then, of course, I'll ask them, okay, what do you think should have happened? What were the next events, and what do you think the outcome was, right? And then eventually this kind of opens up for discussion, and then I'll tell them exactly what happened, and then of course we'll analyze as to why with Emmett Till the background of his mother and why she chose to have an open casket at this time, right? And so that kind of gets the students to think, and then of course determine of why there was Black empowerment, Chicano empowerment during this time, and exactly what was going on. And it kind of relates to them, right? And of course, what minorities were fighting for back then. And so for some of them, they'll feel that kind of sense of resemblance of the choices and the opportunities that they have today.
Okay, excellent, excellent. Um, Now, how do you tie this into, say, problem solving?
So problem solving, especially for them, I tend to ask them a question whether or not they feel that we have in today's society, right? Um, if they felt that we have advanced in society in regards to equality, or if they feel with certain events, right, with today, right, this is their own opinion, whether or not the United States has regressed, right? And so if they feel that they have regressed, what kind of solutions do they think could help to kind of get us back on track towards equality and promoting equality?
Okay. Okay, so you're going to create, you will kind of encourage classroom discussions revolving around like current real life scenarios, real life experiences for people that issues that are going right now.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So now we're going to move on to the next question. That's under standards 2.1, achieving expectations. How do students take initiative for their own learning and self-monitor their progress?
So for students, especially when they're new, I tend to give them, well, all students have a folder, right? And in that folder, they have a chart. It tells them what they're expected to do for the week and what is due by that end of the week, right? So Fridays, I tend to try to include makeup days. So this kind of allows them to turn in any kind of missing works and catch up, right? So that they're not falling behind.
Okay.
And so for students, when they come in,
Um, which allows the student to kind of be removed from the classroom and kind of lets them kind of decompress and helps manage student behavior.
yes.
Okay, excellent. Um, Now, lastly, and this is the last question, it's under standards 3.3. It's regards to classroom culture. How is positive rapport amongst students established and maintained?
So positive rapport among students is established when they kind of come in. I kind of ask them how they're doing, right? So every time they enter my classroom, I'm like, good morning, good afternoon, right? Hope you had a good day, right? And same thing applies when they leave. Like, thank you, students. I hope you have a wonderful day. It's always something with a positive greeting, right? When I meet them, right? And so it happens on the very first day that they enroll at NAS, right? I try to communicate with them. I try to establish and foster that relationship, right? So that they understand, right? What are the expectations, right? Who am I as a teacher? And so that they understand that I'm there to help them, right? Especially help them not only be successful in the classroom, but be successful at NAS so that they can go back to their home campus, right? And a lot of them do appreciate that. Oftentimes I get their opinions about, I really enjoy your classroom. I love it at NAS. I feel like the teachers care about us, right? And so I oftentimes kind of get to tell them, like, what's just easier for us to get to you, right? The classrooms as big as they get is about 25 for us, right? And with our smallest being about roughly 15 kids, for lucky nine, right? But oftentimes that smaller group, right, kind of helps us get to them faster, and so they feel that we genuinely care. And so I have to tell them, well, it's not that your teacher doesn't care about you, it's just that your teacher has 40 kids in the classroom and they are trying to manage you, they are trying to get to you. And so I try to help them, right, build that self advocacy so that when they go back to their home campus, they can actually let their teacher know they need help.
Okay, excellent. So building positive rapport within your classroom, the way you maintain it is you're greeting them at the door when they enter, you're telling them to have a great day when they leave. You're communicating positively to them. That's, for example, positive reinforcement. You also inquire about their interests. Um, do you utilize surveys at all in your as part of
Yes.
your classroom culture?
Yes, I do utilize student surveys, right? When they start their first day, it kind of gets me to better understanding of who they are, right? And what their needs are, their learning needs, right? So
Okay.
sometimes in that survey, they kind of tell me, oh, okay, I work, right? This is why I'm going to be tired. And they kind of tell me, okay, I babysit my siblings when I come home, right? And then it kind of gives me an insight of who this student is. And
Okay.
then they kind of
Excellent.
also tell me, oh, I'm sorry. Then they kind of also tell me what their learning needs are. Okay. So sometimes they'll tell me, okay, shorter readings or highlighted text, or I need a highlighter when we're looking at sources, right? Um, or they'll tell me I better learn with videos or PowerPoint slides, teacher notes, graphic organizers, right? They'll mention those things as in what helps me, right? One of the questions are what helps me understand your learning needs, what will help you be successful in this classroom. And oftentimes than not, they'll fill that out and they'll let me know this has been helpful to me.
Okay, excellent. That's awesome. It's a great use of surveys. That's gonna wrap up our meeting. I think that's all the questions I have for you. I do appreciate your time on this, and I do look forward to our observation tomorrow, Mrs. Mendez. So thank you again, and I hope you have a great day.
All
Thank you.
right. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.
Now, good evening. My name is Dennis Olivares, and I will be conducting my post-conference questions with a fellow social studies teacher, Talia Mendez. We're going to go over my observation of her class on Friday. Um, but just to start off with the going into the planning and domain of your lesson, how did your lesson planning align with your learning objectives and also our TEAC standards?
So for the learning objective, I wanted students, and I usually have the I statements, the I can, right? And so for students, they understand on the board, I like to use classroom screen. So you got your essential question, you got your objective, you got your warm up and exit ticket right on one screen. And so on there, I have their learning outcomes, which is I can describe the historical development of the civil rights movement. Which include the 13th, the 14th, the 15th Amendment, which resembles TEAC 9A, right? Readiness. And then at the same time, I include on there, they can analyze how these amendments were used to expand the right to participate in the democratic process, right? And then, of course, which leads to Supreme Court cases, right? And these Supreme Court cases align to the TEACS 9J and 20A, where we start to see Sweat versus Painter, Brown versus Board of Education, right? And then, of course, we have the beginning, right? Plessy versus Ferguson, which establishes the separate but equal doctrine, which then leads up to Sweat versus Painter, which is that first step leading up to the integration of education facilities, but at a professional level, right? Graduate school. And then we start seeing Hernandez versus Westminster, right, for the Chicano movement, right, for Hispanic students. And then we get to Brown versus Board of Education, right, which establishes the full integration, overturning that separate but equal doctrine.
And just to kind of point out what you said earlier about how your classroom is set up and how I noticed it myself when your students enter, you're greeting them at the door. They all seem very familiar with you, very comfortable, and they walk in and like you mentioned earlier, your essential question or your agenda, and your agenda's on the board. They know where their materials are. There's the routine you have going in, and it looked really smooth. And is that something that consistently happens, or do you ever have any hiccups?
That is something that consistently happens. But because of these routines, they're a huge time saver because whenever I do get like a couple of students who are new and sometimes I don't know about it until we get to that second period and I have like five students at the door, they have no idea what's going on. So I tell them come in, grab a pencil, grab the assignment by the desk, go find a desk that's free. And so more times than not, I see the students that are used to the routines, they'll tell them what to do. They'll say, okay, the warm up sheet paper is over there in the absent folder, which is by the door. They'll show them where it's at. They'll grab it. They'll tell them, okay, this is how Miss Mendez does their warm ups. And it kind of helps me because while I'm outside my door still observing students while during passing periods, I have my kiddos who are just used to the routine helping these new students out.
Oh, okay, awesome.
Yeah.
A lot of peer-to-peer, some peer-to-peer instruction opportunities there. Now, going over like your lesson, what strategies do you think you use that in terms of like differentiating instruction for the diverse learners that you have in the classroom? What strategies do you think were like most effective?
I like oh, so I like doing like scaffolding sometimes, right? But for this particular lesson, since we were reviewing, I wanted to ensure that they understood the tics for that week, right? What I did was I created like individual stations, which was extremely helpful. I had students analyze the Supreme Court cases. I had students look up and research civil rights leaders. So I had Chromebooks out, right, for students, and I had them do rotations, okay? And this kind of helped them out, especially for my special education students, right, our SPED. I give them the modified assignments, right? And so as we're doing like this 30-minute review lesson, right, in stations, the students are learning from each other. And so you may have noticed that when we were done, I had students sit back at their desk and we discussed it all together. So if there were any kind of gaps, the students were able to teach each other during that review.
Yes,
And then it kind of helped me. Yeah. And it kind of helped me because if there were like any gaps, I was able to fill it. Right. And these stations help me, especially with reviews, because I can actually check in on the students. I just monitor and adjust with them. And so with that in mind, we kind of close it up for discussion when we're done with the stations. And I tend to have the timers, right? Since I had 3 stations that day, right, for 30 minutes, I had them on a 10-minute timer, right? And then we were able to rotate and
right.
then include that discussion at the end to kind of fill in those gaps.
Right. And yeah, the students, I noticed that you did have students wanting to ask questions. And then when you had them consolidated, they had those opportunities for you to engage with them and to, cover those learning gaps, like you mentioned. Yeah, I think it was maybe a couple kids in the further row. They're kind of a little most distant from you normally, I assume. So, but they were able to interact with you and you're able to cover the learning gap. Further, in addition to that, how do you anticipate and plan for any potential challenges, misconceptions that occur in the room? Like, for example, new students, right? Like, how's that go?
So for that, since like I mentioned, right, sometimes the students that are so well into the routine, they've been there for a while. Because sometimes I'll get like those few that are in there for like 30, 60 days, right? And so they're so used to the routine, they already know. And so when they see someone who's like new, they'll come talk to them. They'll say, okay, so if you don't know the warm up, it's okay. We discuss it together, right? This is where Miss Mendez has that warm up sheet. This is where you grab your pencil. This is the paper, right? Miss Mendez will give you a folder, right? And so during that time, right, these students kind of help me, right? But they also help each other out. And so that kind of also establishes that sense of welcoming and trust for that new student who's probably never been to our alternative school. And sometimes more than not, it's their very first time. So they have no idea how the campus works, how the teachers are, how the students are, right? And so for them to feel like a peer is coming up to them and telling them, hey, this is how it is, gives them a little information about me because of their experience and the relationship that they have with me, right? Kind of eases that their mind. And so when I do come into the classroom, right, and I have the students working on the warm up, I set time aside for these new students and I give them their folder. I give them the organization sheet so that they're already structured and organized for the week,
Yeah.
right? And then I give them the survey results and I tell them, okay, I'm going to give you some time. I would like you to fill this out and turn it into me because it helps me understand your learning needs. And then it gives me a little information about you. And I usually tell them, such as if you work at night, right? It'll kind of tell me why you come in tired, or, it kind of gives me a little bit more information about who you are as a student, right? And so that kind of helps me. Now, any potential challenges sometimes, because I usually have it every year, right? Once every year or once every semester, okay? And I'll either
Sequences. Okay, that's good to hear. Now, I was going to ask you, how do you reflect on your instructional practices, and what areas do you see for growth?
So, although this is my 5th year of teaching, I wouldn't say that I know it all because I don't, right? Teaching is a growth business and it always will be, right? 10 years from now, I don't doubt that there'll be new applications that I'll have to learn,
Yeah,
right?
constant.
And so
Always
constant,
something new. There's always something new.
it's always something new, right? And we know that with every year when there's a new PD and they got a new goal, a new vision, right? A new statement, and now they have these new applications that they want the students to get into, right?
Yeah.
This year it's AI and writing, right? And so when I reflect on my instructional practices, I look at areas where I will need improvement, especially if it's something new, right? I'm not going to start something and say, okay, this was horrible, I'm going to quit, right? No, I kind of look at it at the end of the day, right? And I'm always adjusting, right? I'm like, okay, this didn't work 2nd period, maybe it'll work 5th period. Let me change this, right?
Yeah.
And then I continue to adjust and adjust, and then by the time I get to 8th period, I figure out that some things that work and some things that don't, right? And so I think that when I reflect on my instructional practices, I see what works with our students, right? And what kind of areas that I will need to adjust, right, to ensure that it's still implemented and continue to practice, right? Continue to practice until I finally feel that, okay, this works with the students, right? And so for areas that I see with growth is just with these new not IAs, with these new AIs applications, right? Such as DIFIT, right? I want to be able to use that, especially with an EB student that I have that's like beginner level, and she's a junior, right? And she's actually, confided in me that she really doesn't want to know English, and so I'm trying to use AI that would help, translate these assignments and help me help her, right? And at the same time, allow the students to be, exposed,
Yeah.
right, to the English lesson,
Yeah.
exposed to the assignments that are in English, right? And so in areas that I see for growth is just attending more trainings, right? Because we're always in a constant change, constant state of change, that I feel that if I stopped attending trainings and, I'll fall behind, right? And I feel like I said, right, teaching is a growth business, and so there's always something new to learn.
Yeah, and that's something I think it's not anything new, but it's always the technology element is new and some of the problems are still old. For example, I'm having to pick up on translating English to Spanish for assignments, and because I get Spanish speakers, so I had to learn how to translate documents over from English to Spanish. And I started using Google Documents more because it has an inbuilt translator. So I can just copy paste or convert the document from English to Spanish. So it saved me a lot of time. Um, and I know enough Spanish to like explain the gist of what they need to do and answer questions that they could have. I'm not as fluent as you, but thankfully I know just a little bit enough of it. Um, Next, I was going to ask you, what support or resources do you think would help you improve student outcomes in your classroom?
For support and resources, well, it's not. Sometimes I feel like with my bigger classrooms, right? I know you saw the one classroom that I have 15.
Yes.
But with my bigger ones, like if I have 22, right? An extra body would help, right? Not that they're, um, disengaged or anything of this sort, right? It's just a lot in one room,
Yeah.
especially of our unique kiddos, right?
Yes.
And so
Big
I
time.
feel like with an extra body, that would kind of help me as I'm continuously trying to help these students, right? If a student needs more my attention, I can help them one on one. But then I got the other couple of students who have several questions, right? And that kind of steps in with me trying to come back and say, okay, well, this is what we're doing, right? And kind of reinstating that. But again, that extra body would kind of help
Right.
in
No, it
bigger
does.
classrooms.
It helps,
Um,
whether that's like helping you with a presentation or signing a restroom pass, like filling out restroom passes so your instruction doesn't get interrupted. Or just keeping an eye out on the students because we do have an interesting population. We have had incidents in classrooms, unfortunately, with drug use, as unfortunate as it is, and having an extra set of eyes in the room is beneficial. Um, so I can definitely sympathize with you on that. Um, and the last question I have for you is based on this lesson that you taught regarding civil rights and this use of station activity and all that, uh, what is one goal you would like to set for yourself when it comes to future instruction?
I would like to do a social studies field trip. That is something that I thought was impossible when I first started at Downs because of the admin that we had then. But the admin that we have now, because of all these changes, right? I do enjoy their team, and we just got approved this month, right?
Yes.
For to go to UTSA with our juniors and our seniors, right?
Okay.
Which was a huge success. Okay. Um, in getting it approved, right? We haven't gone yet, but in getting it approved was a huge deal for me, right? And so I feel like a goal for me as a social studies teacher, especially for these students, is to organize a field trip, not just to go visit like universities, but to visit like museums. So
Yeah.
especially since January, right, this past month, we worked on projects, right, for the Holocaust Remembrance Week.
Yes, we did.
And I would really enjoy that week if for next year, right, to visit the Holocaust Museum in San Antonio. And so that's a goal that I would like for the social studies department to do.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Excellent. How many students do you have going to the university?
We have 10 to 15.
And wow, okay. And to do the tour?
Yes, to do the
Okay.
tour, and we got two teachers, so it's me and the English coordinator, and then one admin.
Oh, okay. Okay, excellent, excellent. Now, okay, so that's gonna do it for my post-conference questions. I just want to say I really enjoyed observing your lesson. I think you have an excellent classroom. I think other teachers on campus, especially any new ones we get, would really benefit from observing your methods and your practices that you have going, and how you build rapport with our population is really impressive. Um, is there, any questions, any concerns that you have, yeah, off the top of your head regarding our post-conference meeting?
No, not at all.
All right, excellent. I just want to thank you for your time. I really enjoyed, getting to watch your lesson and learning how your classroom works and getting to see your stations. And I always enjoy that topic of civil rights with Supreme Court when it ties into like Supreme Court cases and whatnot. I always find that to be very interesting. Again, thank you for your time, and I hope you have a nice night.
Thank you.